Totally forgot to hit record on the first part of the class. Apologies. I'll get better. I made myself a note that I will put on. We're in breakout, so it'll be a minute before you have anybody to listen to. But I didn't want to forget.
Well, we were down here. So principal, yeah. And we thought that was interesting about parents.
Yeah, I think on a positive it's a friendly evaluation. So it says that IBA. It's like two things that says that a student must receive an evaluation. Determine whether they actually qualify as a child with disability, and if so, determine the educational needs best. And then the article also has like 7 or 8 bullet points that say what an appropriate evaluation actually is. So one applies, but they're not even like in this specific case. They're not even offering an evaluation.
That's what you said. Thank you. I forgot to write. I thought it was, yours is about. Oh, thank you. Okay, sorry. I read the last part about the.
They should have had a discussion,
Better for me.
with the parents.
But, yeah, I'm sorry.
So we definitely pay attention.
Sorry. No, you're good.
You're not proud, so they definitely need to find something. Take it.
They should
These are. They are not. Yeah, that are in the right. And they're. Does everybody have a feel for what's happening? Like, does anybody need a little more time? You guys need one more time?
Yeah.
Okay, couple more minutes, not a problem. We're going to. No, just. Oh, then we're good. Okay, just the one you were assigned, so you guys. Okay, let's do this. Okay, so number one, again, in the way of being a proper, I'm gonna read it to you. So Jacob's a friendly 9-year-old boy with progressive vision loss. Although he's participated actively in preschool programs, Jacob has experienced persistent visual loss resulting in significant low vision and has the provision of special education services through an IEP. Jacob's family has recently moved to a new school district in another state just at the start of the school year. At a recent IEP meeting, the educators told his parents that their school district did not serve students with significant vision problems or students who are blind, stating, "We don't have the personnel to serve students with vision impairments. We always refer these students to the School for the Blind, which has excellent programming for students like Jacob and can better cater to his unique needs." What did you guys discuss? What do you think?
We went with least restrictive environment. We said that kind of falls into access to general education, which is the main issue with their denying them the ability to go to school.
Make a case for that. Is there another one that you talked about?
Yeah, I principle 2, appropriate evaluation. We don't think this is a private school because it says that they're having an IEP meeting, and that's referred to a school district.
Yeah.
Which I think implies public, and so, they're not meeting any of the criteria for, evaluating whether this, like, the second one specifically to determine the educational needs of the student. So.
Yeah, what data did they bring there? Good. All these arguments are feasible, but there is one that's, I was thinking more, so, not that it's a right or wrong answer, they're violating the criteria. But which one may be, does anybody else have a thought? Another one that might be violated? It is. My thought on this one was 0 reject, and I'll tell you why. However, you can make a case for any of the others, and you guys did a great job. So how you answered that on the assessment, I would have told you that's awesome. I was thinking this, but that's cool. So 0 reject. All means all. You can absolutely not reject any person from a school district. If you do not have the capability, like the school described, to support this student, then you have to pay for them to go to the Schools of Blind. So you have to pay for their tuition, you have to pay for their busing, you have to make sure they can get there, all that stuff. So they've done that on purpose because they would prefer that the local school where this child lives, the district, be the person to help or the group to help that child. But if it's determined by all parties, including parents and student in an IEP meeting, they are uncomfortable with what they're going to get from this school for whatever reason, then the school district can pay for the child to go to another school. Make sense? Okay, so you made justifications for either, it works. There we go. So let's do number 2, vignette number 2. During an IEP meeting, after an evaluation, determine if, and I think does anybody know how to pronounce that? I always say Dongjil. I'm going with that. Okay, that's where we're going. An 11-year-old Korean boy who has been in the US for 3 years and speaks Korean at home. The school team members share his assessment results. They report that Dongjil participated in one assessment procedure, the WPPSI, which is an IQ measure. Because he seems to speak English quite well and has been in the US long enough, the test was only conducted in English. The parents and team felt bad after the school psychologist reported that Dongjil scored within the mild cognitive impairment range. They felt bad, but they didn't do anything about it. So what do you guys think in the back?
Non-discriminatory evaluation, because you have to use for evaluation, you have to use the language that the child uses.
Yes, yes. In order to evaluate a child, you have to do it in their language. Because, again, ESL is not a disability. It is learning a second language. It has nothing to do with cognitive ability, but they did give this person an IQ test, which is unfair because it was in English, because they were in the country long enough to justify not giving it to them in their native language, which would have been Korean. So totally illegal, cannot do that. Evaluation should be free from cultural and linguistic bias. So cultural is another piece you really have to consider, and must be included must include information from several sources. So not just an IQ test. So you notice they only gave him the one. They should have given him a couple, multiples, to determine if he knows English, first of all. Should have done that first. And then if the score on that test said that he did know English well enough to take an IQ test in English, different story. They did. They only did the IQ test. So they have to determine whether a student has a disability and to identify the abilities in order to inform the special education and related services team. So the whole point of an IEP is to make sure that you've adequately identified or accurately identified a person disability or disabilities, and that you are providing the services they need in order to thrive. So whatever aspect of their disability is interfering with their educational performance is what is then included as a goal in the IEP, and then the services around it are what they use to move forward. And then we have to gather data and see if what they're doing is working, etc. We're going to dig really deep into IEPs, so I'm not going to go too far at this point, other than to tell you it's one of the big principles of the law. All right. So number 3. I don't think I have these in order, y'all, but no, I do. All right, here we go. At a recent IEP meeting, 7-year-old Jonas's mother entered the conference room and enjoyed in a friendly chat, that's not proper English, with the teachers. Next, the group began the formal part of the meeting by sharing their concerns for Jonas's development. Jonas's mother said that she has been worried about Jonas's communication skills. At the time of the meeting, he continued to lag behind his peers, but had made progress. The teachers confirmed that Jonas continued to have difficulty communicating. Oh my gosh. Bad grammar, sorry, despite the help of a speech language pathologist and developmental therapist. Directly afterwards, the service provider said, "Good news, we have a new book with tons of IEP goals. We just picked a few and entered them on the IEP. So the IEP is all done. I'll read the goals and then you just sign here." Ooh, this makes me like my skin crawl. So what do y'all think?
We have like traditional ones we call them IEP. Both the individualized and broker education and procedural due process.
Yep, I think you can make a case for both in this one. So tell us a little bit about the individualized education.
That wasn't, but,
Whoever wants to stand.
I mean, I can talk about it.
Okay.
I didn't do that one, but to my knowledge, it, just like they were like, we got this new IEP book. Jonas can just have this IEP as his plan because that's what we have instead of making an individualized plan for him.
Nailed it. That's exactly right. And then the due process, what was the justification on that one?
I said that they kind of, like, they got the input from his mother, but they didn't really like, I feel like they didn't really take it into consideration and they didn't really, tell her what they were doing with the IEP, they were just like.
Right.
Instead of like taking it for input. and consideration.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother principle too, the parent principle, right? The parent participation principle. So I think you're right. They screwed up in a lot of ways. So yes, I was on this one. I think the one that most strongly aligns is the individualized education, which is this one. So it has to be individualized to the student. And unfortunately, this copy paste IEP thing is a real bugaboo. And in fact, it's something that my colleagues and I fight about quite often because we have Voice Advisor, which supports our virtual reality environment, but I've also created lists of IEP goals that are used for the case study students that we use to help teachers make connections, contextualize needs. And so there are IEP goals, and my biggest fear is that people are gonna take these IEP goals. Oh, Todd has autism. Cool. So does my kid. I'm gonna just copy Todd's IEP goals and stick them into my kid's IEP. And that's the worst thing because it's very much a violation of IDA. But I also understand that writing IEP goals is really hard. And so I'm okay with people using it as a reference and then individualizing it based on the child. So if you need a social skill goal, for instance, I'm totally cool with you borrowing mine, but then you have to work with the IEP team to customize it to fit your student's individual needs. That's this principle. So said that, yeah, just it's really put in place to ensure effective education based on the student's needs. And this reminds me, the reason IDA exists is because a bunch of advocates for people with disabilities said, we have no recourse. We have nothing we can take to the school district to say, no, you really do have to help me. Like you can't exclude me. So IDA put these principles in place to protect all parties, not just the kid and their parents, but also the school, the teacher. So everybody understands what's required. And so that as we move forward and if things happen, you know, like violations like what we're talking about here, then we have something to fall back on. Saying, no, this is the principle and we have to follow the principle. So it's in place for everybody. All right, here we go. Let's do 4 and then we'll do 5 and we'll be done. Oh, you can't see what I see. Okay, Susie is a 2nd grader who loves math. She has a learning disability in reading and communication delays. The IEP meeting was going very well. Members of the team that were present, including the special education teacher, general education teacher, speech language pathologist, and Susie's mom, developed the IEP goals and were discussing related services. All that is good. They determined Susie should receive 2 hours a week of speech language services to meet her academic goals. However, no local education agency representative, or the LEA, such as the principal or special education director, was present or designated at the meeting as required by IDA. Just as the meeting was winding down, the special education teacher said, I need to check with the special education director before determining the recommended level of speech language services for Susie, and abruptly left the room to get the LEA's signature. What was violated on this one? Group in the back, yes? Okay, what did you guys decide?
We went off of the individualized appropriate education, because of like the requirements of who needs to be present in the IEP meetings, because there was no local education or agency representative, designated to the meeting in the first place and not there. The fact that they would go to like check with them was not good.
Right. And that is actually a procedural due process violation, but your argument stands. But the procedural due process says that the people have to be in the room who can make the decisions. You cannot have an IEP meeting and not have the people who hold the purse strings present, because you have to make decisions in the meeting. You sign the IEP in the meeting. You can't walk away and have somebody sign it or move down the road. That is a violation of IDA. And then happens because people make decisions in other rooms that aren't in the room with the people who are supposed to be making the decision. So that's procedural due process. Let me go over there. The other parts of procedural due process include that, well, first, parents and schools are responsible for carrying out the students' IDA rights. So if they are in disagreement, they have the right to a resolution session. If they can't figure it out, then they have the right to mediation, meaning they bring an expert in from somewhere that's unbiased to have a conversation with the two groups. And then they can have a due process hearing at the state level. And I have friends who have taken it that far and won, but it can be very difficult. But procedural due process is the principle that allows them to do that. It also is the one that says who has to be in the meeting. It has to include parents and schools on all the parties who can make the decisions. So you can't, again, you can't make decisions about funding if you don't have the person in the room that makes the decisions about funding or the ability to service a child. Make sense? All right, that's a tough one, by the way, because it can go either way. Escape. All right, last one. Marissa is an energetic 5-year-old with communication and cognitive delays, previously served successfully in an inclusive preschool setting. At the start of Marissa's IEP meeting, Marissa's parents were happy to learn that the professionals at her daughter's new elementary school seemed to have collaborated effectively with her previous preschool teachers. However, when discussing the setting for their special education services, the team was reluctant to place Marissa in a general education kindergarten full-time, stating, "Because she's new to kindergarten and to the school, let's see how well Marissa does in a resource room or self-contained classroom before we place her in a more inclusive setting where she may be overwhelmed." Marissa's parents were disappointed because they strongly believed Marissa benefited from being educated with her typical peers and had been successful in this type of setting up to that time. What'd y'all decide?
It's the violation of no reject.
Zero reject is a piece of that, but there, it goes deeper on this one. Yeah.
I was gonna say the least restrictive environment,
Yeah, you can make the case, but yes.
because the least restrictive environment thing, it basically says that students with disabilities should be allowed in the same classroom as students without disabilities to the extent in like which they can be. And so since it stated that like she was previously in a school, in a preschool, that she did just fine in. And then another like part of it that was like kind of like odd to me was because she's new to kindergarten and to the school is like kind of odd because all kindergartners are new to this school.
And to kindergarten.
Yeah, into kindergarten, so it's kind of like,
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the reasoning was not found, but I've seen some crazy stuff that I've been reading. But yes, least restrictive environment is the #1 bugaboo of any IEP meeting that I've ever been in. And we'll talk more. AJ.
So as for like what they could have done better, I think one of the biggest things here is when you're already separating students at the beginning, that's kind of where everyone makes friends and gets to know each other. So you're excluding that student from that. So I think if they swapped it the other way around and tried her in the gen ed classroom first, and if that didn't work out, then to a different classroom, that would be better than the alternative where they're starting her excluded and then trying to include her, because that's gonna be harder.
Right, because last class we talked about the presumption of competence. It's always going to be safer to presume competence. If Marissa gets into that kindergarten class and it didn't work after a couple of weeks or however long it takes, and then they come back together and say, okay, that's not gonna work. The least restrictive environment, it's okay if the child needs to be in a different placement. There's nothing wrong with that. There are a lot of kids who thrive. In fact, you're gonna watch a video, I think next Thursday, where you're gonna hear from kids who could go either way and make choices that they want to be in a least restrictive environment, meaning they want to be, that's not, I didn't use that properly. They want to be in a separate room than their peers because they feel more comfortable there, and that's okay. But the IEP meeting has to make that decision, and everybody needs to be on board. And here, the school went over their heads, I think, and didn't listen to the parents. So it's another violation too, right?
And they also like told like the parents and like, I guess like Marissa wasn't there, that she would feel this way if they stayed. Like you don't tell someone's parents
or like the parents, like your child's gonna feel this way.
Right, right. You're not presuming competence. You're assuming that a child's gonna feel a certain way. You don't even know that. Especially since they're new to school.
This is probably the first thing.
Right. Or you may not have ever met them. You're just reading their old IEP. So yes, all of those things, y'all. So now you're gonna start to sense when people are kind of stepping out of line in different situations. And if you start to feel like, that doesn't seem right, it probably isn't, right? It's probably violating some aspect of one of the principles, because everybody in that IEP meeting should be on the same page. Or, you know, there is gonna be a situation where a parent disagrees, they have a lot actually like this. And they don't necessarily agree, but they come to a compromise and determine they're gonna try something for a certain amount of time, then they'll analyze and reassess, gather data, and make a different decision if the data proves that it's not working, right? Or if there's a better route. So there are steps that can be taken, and I find that really good administrators and really good SPED directors handle IEP meetings quite well. And as long as everybody is willing to help and their number one wish is to help the child to be as successful as possible, then it goes really well. It's when you get into a situation where a parent or a teacher, especially a teacher, is scared or unsure how to help a child, and they've kind of given up, or they're just so frustrated, they don't know what to do. That's when tension starts to boil. But a good special educator and a good administrator would know going into that IEP meeting if a teacher was, right? They would just show up at an IEP meeting and find out that your faculty doesn't know what they're doing, or they're not comfortable, I think. So anyway, all of that's going to come to bear when we do the IEP meeting. But that one is definitely least restrictive environment. And it's the biggest conversation that I see, because there are a lot of situations where a teacher doesn't feel like a child is able to participate fully, and it's not their best situation. But the parents and maybe even the student disagree. And they think, no teacher, if you did it this way, I would be able to be successful. Or no school district, if you did it this way, I would be successful. And that's where the tension arises. And LRE is what we call it. Least restrictive environment is where we get the biggest tension. All right, last one. We'll do this as a group and we'll be done. I think, yeah, time-wise, we're good. Okay. Nick is a 13-year-old boy with an intellectual disability who is in an inclusive class for the first time this year. At the IEP meeting, the teacher shared some positive comments, but struggled when talking about Nick's behavior in class. Nick seemed to always be off task and was very reluctant to participate in class activities. In frustration, the teacher blurts out, "Look, honestly, Nick is just not into school. I prepare to do engaging and challenging activities for the class each day. The activities are interesting for all of the other students. Perhaps if we have him come half day instead of full day, it will give you time to work on his behavior at home. Ooh. If not, we could refer him to separate class that caters to children with behavior problems where he can be more successful." What do y'all think? Zero reject. Yep. You can't reject, although they're not outwardly rejecting him, right? They're just saying, I can't help you, which is zero reject. But also they're trying to say, why did you go half? So they're not saying he can't come at all. What would be another one, y'all? Caroline? Yep. I think on this one, y'all, they're violating a bunch of things, but you could definitely make a case that it's not individualized. I think this is definitely a violation of least restrictive environment. I also feel like they're not necessarily doing, well, I feel like this one's really least restrictive environment because they're trying to say you can go to a half a day, but not a full day. And then my favorite is you can work on his behavior at home, which goes over really well with parents, let me tell you. Probably don't want to make that statement, even though it might be true. But the separate class that caters to children with behavior problems where he can be more successful, that's the conversation around LRE, least restrictive environment. So which environment is going to be the best, the least restrictive with regard to learning? That's where Nick should be. So as a group, they might decide that Nick may actually be better off in a behavior classroom. That's okay. But remember, presuming competence, and then also really helping this teacher and looking at what they're doing and looking at Nick's characteristics and behaviors, understanding what some of the triggers are to figure out that maybe something the teacher's doing isn't working. Especially if they're in a middle or high school and the only classroom they struggle is one classroom, you know, what's going on in there, right? Is that really a least restrictive environment problem, or is that a teacher problem? So that social model. Okay, so it's a lot of gray, right? The law, it's the law, and it's always kind of, but at the same time, there are legs to stand on. That's my favorite part of IDA, is that it gave power back to teachers, well, it does to teachers, but it really gave power back to parents and students who felt like the school was just telling them what's gonna happen. Like, this is how you're gonna be successful in our school, get on board or get out. That doesn't work anymore with IDA. Okay, you can go back to your seat and we'll finish up here. Yes. All right, I didn't pull up this slide, but I'll just hit on it before we move on. The parent and student participation part. Again, remember when IDA came down the pike, the biggest advocates were parents and people with disabilities themselves, but really parents. And they had the right to access. So back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, if a kid was mainstreamed, and that's not a nice word because basically, when IDA was first passed, the schools, some of them didn't handle it real well. And they said, okay, you person with a disability, you are welcome to come into our school. Here's your schedule, good luck. You just expected them to be successful. And that's called mainstreaming. So you just toss a person into the stream that's happening and expect them to do well. And of course, it doesn't go well. And then unfortunately, inclusion, or this notion of IDA of including all kids, gets a bad rap because kids are not, they probably aren't on task. They may be causing behavior problems because they aren't being properly included. And so adjustments have to be made so that people aren't just brought to the table, but they have a voice at the table, right? That belonging notion. So parent and student participation was one of the principles because parents were tired of not having access to decision-making, being on a team to make decisions about how their child's going to be integrated into the school. But also they didn't have access to the students' records. And that it was, oh, and even now, sometimes you get some school districts who don't want to let parents see their own child's records, which is clearly legal, right? And so IDA gives access to those records. Now you can see the data that's been collected, if it's been collected, and then what it's telling you and why decisions are being made. And so that gave parents and students the right to participate in the decisions that were making about a child's education. Also, a note, rights transfer to student at age of majority unless they have qualified for the state to support their decision making, which my husband's sister, not daughter, but sister, she had fetal alcohol syndrome. She was adopted, and when she turned 18, her biggest thing was she wanted to move out of her parents' house and she wanted to get a job. She wanted to make money, all the outcomes we're about to talk about. But she also really struggles with making good choices. And so she gets herself into scary situations that have to be helped. And so when she turned 18, she didn't have the cognitive ability to be completely independent. So her rights didn't transfer to her entirely. She had a voice, as she had throughout her IEP program, but the state then took over. Or you can actually sign it so the parent remains the guardian. So that's the way they did it, was the parent remained the guardian. So anyway, it's just important to note that at 18, kids who can, then they become their own guardian, right? And so my son turned 18 when he was September of his senior year. So he would have had full guardianship of himself his whole senior year. So he would have been in on that IEP meeting. Okay. Non-discriminatory practices that ensure meaningful improved outcomes. So again, not just keeping people out of the room. We talked about that. Okay, so we talked about the first half of this, which was basically being involved in the conversation. Those are the principles, the rights that everybody has around making those decisions. And then the back half of that is the equal opportunity, full participation, independent living, and self-sufficiency. These are the outcomes, the reason that we have IDA. So these are the outcomes. These are the 4 things that people with disabilities wanted for being a part of a school situation. They want to be able to come out of the school with these 4 outcomes. So the IDA principles are designed to help get you there. So let's just talk about those real quick. Equal opportunity. So you may have seen this before. Equality means that everybody gets the same thing. That's equality. So everybody gets a box. But if you notice, the gentleman here on the left doesn't necessarily need a box, was tall enough to see over the fence without it. This person probably needed the box, but this person needs another box, right? So while equality is something people talk a lot about, equity is we give everybody what they need in order to be successful. So this goes beyond disabilities. We've heard this a lot in different contexts, but we want everybody to be able to see over the fence, and we need to give them what they need in order to do so. And so that might be that this person needs more services than this person who doesn't need any services. So why are we giving it to them, right? But what if we get rid of the fence, right? That's that social model. Why are we arguing over the resources in order to see over this fence, which is a social construct, yes, when we can get rid of that and make the fence better, make it a chain link fence, so it still protects everybody, but they can all see the game without any accommodations. That's our goal, right? For me, anyway, that's my goal. And that's universal design for learning, is getting rid of the systemic barriers and providing enough resources that everybody can be successful. And don't let the barriers be the thing that's systemic, right? Don't let the school be the barrier, the teacher be the barrier. Let's figure out how to help all kids be successful as they are whenever possible. So universal design for learning, that'll be the 3rd online day. You guys are actually going to explore a little bit on UDL, and then we'll come together and I'll talk way more about UDL in person on that first day back from our long hiatus. But UDL is ultimately the biggest strategy I'm going to offer you, and one that I hope you think about as you get out into the teaching workforce. All right. So full participation is one of the outcomes of IDA. It's the idea that we're not just mainstreaming, but this person has the right to fully participate in what's happening in the school, right? They get to go to their classes. They get to participate in band. They get to participate in choir. They get to do all those things. We may have to make some adjustments to help them be successful, but they have the right. They cannot be segregated against because they have a disability. They have the right to be present and fully included. Full participation. Independent living. So this is ultimately what we're driving towards. We want these people to be able to independently live to the extent possible. Least restrictive environment could follow them out into the real world. But ultimately, like my sister-in-law, just really want to be independent and to be able to do their own things. So Ashley was put in a group home. So she was able to live independent of her mom, which was her big thing. But she still had someone who could help her not get into trouble. And she can't drive, and so she needed some services to get to her job, because another big part of independent living is economic self-sufficiency. If you want to live on your own, you got to make some money, as you all are learning, I'm sure, on your own. You've got to figure out how to live independently. And you have to do so with money, because we all have to pay for rent and such. So economic self-sufficiency, independent living, full participation, and it's over here. Equal opportunity. So those are the big 4. So when I ask you this question on the exam, I'm going to ask you, what is your role under IDEA? Your role under IDEA, y'all, is to support the 6 principles in your capacity, and then to help ensure that your students are leading towards these 4 outcomes. You can name them in the response, and I'll be so happy. Okay, so if you decide to answer the IDA question on the exam, and I tell you this, in the actual prompt of the exam, and it still doesn't happen. But if you mention the 6 principles, your role under them, and the 4 outcomes, you will get full points. You catch what I'm throwing? I say it every year and it doesn't happen. You know, and we're gonna have a Q&A, and I'll remind you of this right before the test anyway. Okay, so other laws that you may be aware of that have kind of influenced IDA. No Child Left Behind was a scary one that happened, gosh, before y'all were born, maybe? It was like the 90s. It was a good idea. No Child Left Behind. That sounds really good. But unfortunately, they tied a bunch of they did tie federal funding to the students' ability to not be left behind, which ultimately led to why standardized exams are such a big deal now. It used to be they were sort of a flake off when I was a kid. We would take them, but it was like, meh, whatever. But then they tied, with No Child Left Behind, they tied federal funding to success of a school, and that went super fast. As you can imagine, that means that people just started teaching to the test instead of teaching the curriculum as it was designed. And so No Child Left Behind got redone into the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. These 2 are not disability laws. I'm just telling you about them because they are education laws that have taken place. But we are currently under ESSA right now. So it got rid of, or didn't get rid of, but it downgraded the unrealistic goals and penalties of standardized exam results, basically, for funding. So again, IDA has not been reauthorized in a long time, and we're currently concerned about its health and wellness because we need it to stay and we need it to be reauthorized. And our current administration that seems to be in power is not interested in doing so. So that's a big fight that's happening right now, in and amongst all the other fights that are happening. So as I mentioned, UDL, Universal Design for Learning, we're going to get into that a little bit down the road here, but it is part of ESSA. It is part of the law that governs all education. And you'll find it reads about Universal Design for Learning as being a possible way to support all learners. And in fact, I have designed this course to be universally designed so that no matter who comes in here, and I've tested this theory against many, many people, they should be successful. And I think each of you will find that it's successful because you have multiple ways of getting at the content. But my goal is to make sure that when you walk out of here at the end of the semester, you take with you the content that we're discussing here, that it kind of sits with you and that it remains with you as you go into the classroom. If I do that, then I consider myself to have been successful. And so that's what I'm going to be looking for. So you're not going to get I think I've said this, but I'm not a gotcha person, right? I'm not going to try to get you and see if I can fail you, if I can get that really nice curve that shows that I have 50% of my people who come to see. That's not going to happen. I want everybody to be successful because I think that's what makes a good education. And so as long as we can get on the same page, right, and do all the stuff, show up, all that, then you're going to do really well in this class. And the reason I've designed it that way is for these multiple means of representation, action, expression, and engagement. So I know if I can engage you, then at least you're paying attention enough that you can then take in the information in multiple ways and then do something with it. So like today we did the jigsaw. So you'll see multiple means. You could have read about it. You can talk to people about it. You should have read the article ahead of time. There were some video options that I'm trying to give you multiple means of representation. Action expression, I could have had you just write a journal entry on this one, but I didn't. We did a jigsaw, right? You had to get up and move, which is really good for your brain, by the way, even though a lot of us would rather just sit still. It's really good for your brain and learning to get up and move, which is why I love jigsawing. So anyway, I'll continue to give you my meta when it comes to why I do what I do in this class. I'll try to kind of step out and say, okay, I'm doing this because I'm trying to model good practice. So this is a timeline that is up and available. Again, don't memorize it, but for the test, if you want to talk about any of the laws, this would be a helpful resource for you. But you can always look this stuff up. I do not want you to memorize laws and stuff. You can do that later. Although I think it's good for you to understand IDA and be able to articulate in the job interview what you're responsible for under IDA. Okay, I mentioned this already, it came up, but that least restrictive environment is the big bugaboo that we will talk about a lot in this class. But the idea is that students have access to the general education curriculum in the regular classroom to the maximum extent possible, presuming competence. As AJ said, make the presumption that they can until proven otherwise, and then you move. Again, inclusion to the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities are educated with children who are not disabled, and special classes, separate schooling, or other removal of children with disabilities from the regular education environment occurs only when the nature or severity of the disability of the child is such that education in regular education with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. Satisfactorily. So that really lays it out there. That's that least restrictive piece. And that's again where schools and parents tend to really disagree. And sometimes teachers and school districts agree too. We'll talk about that a lot. All right, these are your reminders. Again, on Tuesday, we will be here talking about disability categories. You're going to have an assignment that you'll walk away doing. And then next Thursday, we're going to do a documentary. This is called Including Samuel, which I love, and is a model of inclusion. And then the next time, you're going to do a humanizing disability assignment, and it will all be online after that. But come Tuesday, and I'll see you guys then. Have a great weekend.
I'll have to fix this.
Gretchen?
So-
Involved